They would execute Jim. I underestimated that point. I did not realize how brutal they were, and I actually hoped we could engage in negotiations with them if they were willing to send us any sort of communication, because we'd had none prior.
It's such a stoic family. I want to talk more about the global threat that the Obama administration, from the president on down, has termed cancer. Terrorism expert and author, as well as CNN national security analyst Peter Bergen, joins me live now from Washington. Alongside, from Columbus, Ohio, we welcome Peter Mansoor, who is a retired U.S. Army colonel, CNN military analyst, and also the former executive officer to General David Petraeus during the Iraq War surge. And Colonel, if I may begin with you, is it possible that what happened on video to Jim Foley and the global broadcast of it has awakened a sleeping giant?
Well, let's hope so. This is the first of many atrocities that this group will commit. And it's not just the United States that needs to wake up to that fact, but it's Europe as well, because many Europeans have been captured by groups such as this, and the European governments have shamefully given ransoms to this group and these groups in order to get their people back. But we can feel for them in a humanitarian sense, but all it does is causes groups like this to seize more Western hostages in order to finance their very barbaric activities.
Peter Bergen, earlier today, the family of Jim Foley spoke out, not just his parents, but also two of his siblings, and his brother suggested he was upset with how America dealt with the negotiation process, understanding fully about paying ransom and how dangerous that can be as a precedent and also as a funding tool, but that there are other means, meaning prisoner swaps, perhaps much like the Bo Bergdahl swap. Is this something that you could foresee the Americans engaging in?
I think it's highly unlikely, because in the Bo Bergdahl case, it really was a prisoner of war exchange. I mean, the Taliban were treating him as a prisoner of war, and we treat the inmates at Guantanamo as prisoners of war, so that's very standard. What the Foley family have said, I think, could also be interpreted in a slightly different way, which was there was a hostage rescue operation conducted over the weekend of July 4th. It came up empty, but if that operation had been conducted a little bit earlier, those hostages might have still been there. They were being held in that location for some period of time. And that's a big what if that perhaps they were referring to.
And I want to just play, for anyone who may not have seen this interview that was conducted with Yahoo, what Michael Foley, who is Jim Foley's brother, who was sitting alongside his sister Katie Foley, said about this very notion. Have a look.
You can accomplish both things. The United States could have done more on behalf of the Western and American hostages over there, and still, dealt with the broader worldwide issues. And other nations have done that, and that's been a source of frustration for me. And I really hope that in some way Jim's death pushes us to take another look at our approach, our policy to terrorist and hostage negotiations, and rethink that.
Again, Jim Foley's siblings speaking earlier today about what's happened in the aftermath of the execution of their brother. If I could ask you, Peter Bergen, that the very tough words, and a reminder to our viewers that on the right-hand side of your screen, we're awaiting the Pentagon briefing any moment. It's a weekly briefing, but there is a lot to speak of today. The notion that there is this now ramped up rhetoric, it seems, from the Defense Secretary himself and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs himself yesterday, suggesting, A, we may need to take this battle to Syria, and B, expect anything. Do you foresee this getting to be a tougher war of words, or do you think the Pentagon may have to dial this back in light of the fact we still have at least one open threat against Steven Sotloff, who's being held by ISIS?
Well, this is a political decision, and General Dempsey was just voicing his military opinion that if you want to destroy ISIS, you have to go into Syria. That's just a fact. But at the end of the day, General Dempsey will take the orders from the Obama administration about whether or how or if to do that. You know, I think his comments are factually true, but at the end of the day, it's a political decision that's not his decision.
And General Mansoor, this is such a complicated issue when starting to speak of Syria and the idea that the Joint Chiefs, you know, the head of the Joint Chiefs suggested that this may end up being a battle against ISIS in Syria. There are so many insurgent groups that are different and battling amongst themselves, I dare say, as well as battling the Assad regime there. If America decides to take this battle to ISIS over the Syrian border, could that also be perceived as effectuating an assist to Bashar al-Assad?
Well, I think some people might view it that way, but look, this border, in fact, no longer exists. ISIS doesn't recognize it, and they move people back and forth routinely. If we were to attack ISIS only in Iraq, it would simply move back into Syria and metastasize again. And so General Dempsey's right. It has to be dealt with on both sides of this non-existent border. And we're going to need better intelligence in order to attack it effectively in Syria. Otherwise, we will be attacking a lot of groups that aren't privy to the conflict between the United States and Iraq and this very virulent and deadly terrorist group that we need to defeat, not just contain.
I just gave you quite a promotion calling you General, Colonel. I apologize for that. But Peter Bergen, to that notion that the Colonel just spoke of, and that is the intelligence gathering, the need for it. I think everybody has said that since 9/11, particularly, that there is a critical need for what many people term dirty intelligence as opposed to satellite intelligence. But has the game changed at all in the last year, given the notion of the sheer brutality that ISIS is known to exact on its prisoners? Being a dirty intel officer is an extraordinarily dangerous prospect. Is it more dangerous now than ever and more difficult to achieve?
Well, I think it's not only just the intelligence picture, just the picture of just generally of what's going on in Syria is extremely obscure. And that's because, I mean, one of the reasons we're here talking about this, of course, is James Foley's tragic death. He was a freelancer. He wasn't working for the New York Times or the Washington Post. The freelance organization, Global Post, that he worked for, made every effort to get him out. But the fact is, it's incredibly dangerous. The numbers of journalists covering foreign news is much smaller than it was in the past. I mean, when Colonel Mansoor was General Petraeus' executive officer in Iraq, there was a huge, very effective press corps there. We don't have anything similar in Syria right now. So it's not only the intelligence picture, just the open source picture. And you do get some of that from social media, but it's quite distorted because it's often very partisan for one side or the other. So, you know, I think any kind of decision about what to do in Syria is very much hampered by the fact that we simply don't know very much about what is really going on the ground.
And I just want to again draw our viewers' attention, if you're just joining us, that you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen that the Pentagon briefing is expected to start soon. So we're waiting for Rear Admiral John Kirby to take to the live microphone to update us. This after some pretty strident comments yesterday from his boss, Chuck Hagel, the Defense Secretary, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs as well, stepping up the government's description of what the government considers a cancer, and that is ISIS and the spread of ISIS control throughout the cradle of civilization, effectively. If I could ask you this, Colonel, what could go wrong? I mean, it's easy to suggest going after ISIS when you're sitting in this chair on this side of the ocean, but what could go wrong? What kind of domino effect could happen by broadening the battle, possibly even on the ground, against ISIS?
Well, the danger is if the United States is seen as taking over the fight against ISIS, then ISIS can paint this as a battle of Islam against the great Satan, and get actually more followers to flock to its banners. And this is why the United States has to tread a very fine line between supporting Iraqi efforts and Kurdish efforts and other efforts to combat ISIS and make it an Islam on Islam fight, and not going too far and painting it as sort of an American jihad in the Middle East against a terrorist group. So we're walking a fine line. I don't think we're going far enough just yet, but that may be because the Iraqi government has not been completely formed yet, and we're still waiting for an inclusive government in Baghdad in order to get the Iraqis together. But once that happens, the United States is going to have to step up its game without going over that line that makes us the primary combatant in the region.
Yeah, I think it was Don Rumsfeld, as Secretary of Defense, who put it as the number of known knowns and known unknowns makes it a very tricky guessing game when operating like this, especially in this region. Peter Bergen, just quickly, your thoughts about the notion that right now, as there are several Americans being held hostage, one in direct threat right now, the journalist who was pictured in the same execution video as Jim Foley, Stephen Sotloff, do you expect that there are several or any special operations being conducted as we speak?
Well, I don't know is the short answer, Ashley, but I mean, of course, the plans for such an operation must be front and center. But there are many risks. I mean, we've seen Linda Norgrove, a British aid worker, was rescued by U.S. Special Operations in 2010, and she died in the rescue attempt when a U.S. Navy SEAL dropped a grenade that killed her. So, yes, you have contingency plans for such operations, but they're fraught with risks. And of course, ISIS is keenly aware that already one operation was launched, and so they're presumably going to be very careful. We have 2 other Americans who haven't been publicly disclosed. Their names haven't been disclosed. So it's not just the time freelancer that we also saw in the Foley video. And of course, there are other Westerners still being held from other European countries.
Yes, of course. And as always, our thoughts go out to those families who are waiting. And it's a very difficult time for so many of them. We're going to take a quick break. If you could stand by, gentlemen, please. And I'm just going to again remind us that we're expecting the Rear Admiral John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesperson, to come out and address the press corps there. This is an expected weekly briefing, but granted, we certainly had some pretty strident comments last night from his boss, and so whether that tone will change at all, we're going to get an update as soon as he takes to the mic back after this.